So we have just a quick question here from Beirong asking us, how can we calculate a currency strength or weakness? What data do we look at? So first of all, thanks for the question, Beirong. In answering this question, we need to differentiate between two different types of strengths and weakness. We have short-term sentiment, and then also we have macro fundamentals. Now, for example, a currency might be deemed as strong or weak based on its macro fundamental picture or macro fundamental bias, which will include things like the current outlook for its central bank. So whether the central bank is in a cutting cycle, a hiking cycle, or neutral. So basically where interest rates are now and where they are expected to go in the next 3 to 12 months. Then we also need to consider things like whether markets are expecting the next move from a central bank to be a hike, a cut, or a hold, whether the economic data, the bigger hard data such as inflation, GDP, and employment, what that is saying about the economy, the overall health of the economy. Is the economy contracting or expanding? Is it in a recession? Is it going through a rough patch? Is it basically growing as to expectations, etc.? And then we also need to consider things like fiscal policy can also be a big consideration. Now, these are all elements that can affect the macro fundamental bias for a currency. Now, then we can turn to the short-term sentiment. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the short-term sentiment can often and do often go against the overall macro fundamental bias. For example, we might be very bearish from a macro fundamental point of view on a currency, but the short-term catalyst might mean that it can have a short-term bullish bias. Now, some of the elements that can affect the short-term sentiment include similar things from the fundamental picture. Again, central banks, if the short-term bias for a central bank changes, let's say they have comments that goes against their current overall bias. So let's say they are dovish, but they say something hawkish, that can have a short-term impact. Economic data that prints with unexpected and significant deviations is another one. Now, this is not only focused on the more hard, backward-looking data like GDP and employment, etc., but it can also be more of the shorter, forward-looking, sentiment-based indicators like the PMIs, consumer and business confidence, etc. Then we might also have short-term geopolitical factors that changes sentiment. So some issues between certain countries in terms of politics can also have an impact. Then we might also have natural disasters that can or might affect the short-term sentiment, but might not be enough to change the overall bigger picture. And then we also have sudden changes in other asset classes, right? Like big jumps in equities or commodities, or maybe even the bond market can also affect that short-term sentiment. Now, these are just a few of the things that can affect the short-term sentiment as well as the fundamental picture. But the good news is that we have basically done all of the heavy lifting for you already when it comes to these two different types of analysis, both in our analysis and commentary that we have in the platform. For example, from a more macro fundamental point of view, some of the reports that you can use in the currency research section is the fundamental drivers report. Now, this report goes into detail on what our current macro fundamental picture is for each of the major currencies. So the Aussie, for example, weak bearish, the CAD, for example, weak bearish, etc. And it also provides the reason from a macro fundamental point of view why we take that specific bias. Then taking a slightly more short-term look at macro fundamentals, but also including the macro fundamentals would be the current sentiment drivers reports that you can find in the market insights tab. That'll give you the primary drivers for each of the major currencies, as well as the potential future sentiment shifts and the most recent or latest developments that is currently affecting that currency. Now, that is from the more bigger picture view. Then from the more shorter term, the more sentiment-based approach, you can look at the dominant currency sentiment reports that we also have in the market insights tab every day. You can also, again, look at the tradable sentiment shifts reports also in the market insights tab every day. It basically gives you the potential next big shifts that can move the market to look out for. And then you also have the video commentary that basically also gives you a rundown of the events as it happens through the day, a lot more shorter term view in terms of the current sentiment drivers. So that is just a few of the reports that our analysis and commentary cover with regards to the fundamentals and the short-term sentiment. So I hope that helps you out there, Barang. If there's any other questions, please make sure to let us know.